Fuck it.
Holla ballers! Don't mind if I weigh in on this Mythic Plus situation, do you?
Don't
Good,
mind if
'cause
I
I'm going
weigh
to.
in.
My God, have you guys like looked at the actual official WoW? Don't forget your MMO champion. Forget your Reddit. Have you guys looked at the official forums recently?
Yeah.
Holy shit!
It's half my
What's
content.
happening? What's going on? This is bad. This is bad. This is really bad. I looked at the
It's
US
bad.
forums, and there's like 50 posts or something on the front page of the Dungeons and Forums. It's, you know, a good 30 of them are about Mythic Plus.
Fandy
Went over
came
to
on
the
one.
EU saying, oh man.
People are not happy
really
about
is
Mythic
looking
Plus.
bad. And in fact, it's the feedback I've been hearing from many of you that the Mythic Plus system is crumbling hard.
Because it's a
So I
dog
decided
shit
to
ass
look into
system
it.
of
That's
doing
why
the
I'm
same
here now.
dungeons
And
over
yes,
and
it has
over.
been quite on YouTube. I am working on
Who
a
gives
legacy
a
video
fuck?
at the moment. That's one of the
It's
bigger
boring.
reasons. I've been using every ounce
no
of
growth.
hours I have to work through that. But not only that,
Oh,
I'm in
sorry.
Holland
I forgot the music. My bad.
tomorrow for just a couple of days because it's the first wedding of people in our little PG community. People who
what?
met while at PreachCon. There have been several Preach Gaming babies, you dirty bastards. But this is the first official wedding, so
That's
I am going to
incredible.
it, and I'm very excited. It should be fun, so I'll be on a plane in a
Wow.
few hours.
That's actually
Anyway,
really cool.
what's happening here? I looked back over a lot of
Yeah,
things. One of the bigger
that's
changes
cool
in
as fuck.
BfA was, of course, the movement of Tyrannical and Fortified to M+2 and introducing that earlier. This was done because people hit a massive wall in Legion when those affixes came in, because before that point they never had to learn what the dungeon did. They never had to learn what the dungeon did, and then
Those were the
suddenly
good
they would
days.
just walk into this arena where they were being hit by all the affixes at once. So they could
The
have
only
the
girls
two
are allowed
affixes
at
you would get at 4
Asmongold.
and 7, and then they would walk into +10 and they'd be like, oh my god, and now everything's just got super powerful. All the trash is now
Take a look at
mega
it, Belfont,
powerful.
thanks.
All the bosses are now mega powerful, and the groups would crumble. And it was an
Yeah.
issue at the time for players.
Plus
So
10 and plus
Blizzard
9 was huge
thought
difference.
back and said, well, the only way
He's
we
right.
can really solve this is if we introduce Fortified and Tyrannical earlier, so that people gradually increase their knowledge of what's dangerous with trash and what's dangerous with bosses, and then we can slowly introduce other affixes on top of that. But people should be learning what the trash and bosses do much earlier before having the affixes then having that thrown on them.
That makes sense.
Hasn't quite worked out because people
Yeah.
start figuring it out. That's the problem. They're just not figuring it out, and it's not helping at all. But there's a number of issues all colliding at once here. Like most things with World of Warcraft, it's so big and so varied and so wide that a lot of people like to say this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem. But in fact, it's usually a combination of many different things all happening together. So if we were to just throw ideas at a board here as to why it looks as if Mythic Plus is probably going to be nerfed based on what I'm seeing here.
Well,
I
they
wouldn't be
should,
surprised
because
to
it's
see
not
that.
fun.
The upgrading gear we get in
Like,
8.1 might alleviate this a little bit.
That's all
we'll
it
have
is.
to see where Blizzard goes with this.
Straight
But
up
it
not
feels
fun.
very much like Cataclysm. I don't know about you guys who were around during Cata, but looking at the feedback and the threads here, it feels very much like Cata. But there's
what I
a
said
number
was
of
gonna
problems.
happen.
Let's throw some ideas at the board. One, BfA dungeons are harder. I think that's fair to say. BfA dungeons are harder than Legions. The
I would
trash
agree with that.
mechanics in general are far more prevalent, right? There's a lot more trash mechanics going on, and trash generally is far more condensed, meaning ninja pulls are... I can reel off a huge list of potential ninja pulls that can go on, whereas Legion dungeons in a lot of ways were pretty linear.
That's actually
if you
true.
think about them in terms
Especially
of
in, like,
layout and
the-
design, they were pretty much
the
a
mother
corridor
lode.
for a long way. But if you look more towards BfA dungeons, like Waycrest is literally corridors, but it has multiple ways of going around it. And there's also
You can fuck up.
very small corridors. They're like hyper corridors rather than a dungeon corridor, which is a dungeon corridor. If you're not sure what I'm talking about with corridors and linearity, means that
I like
it
how
might
he
even
says
feel
it.
like it's a wide open area. You could have lots of space, but the way you traverse it is in a very straightforward line. It's very simple, and the
Okay.
trash is usually reasonably spread out, so you can do individual pulls if you want to, or bigger pulls should you want to do that. You'd have to go out of your way to make that happen, is a good way of saying it. But in BfA, ninja pulls and patrols and things like that are far more relevant, and that's because they wanted people
I hate
to
that
get
shit,
more
dude.
benefit and more interest out of dungeons in order
It's not
to
interesting waiting for the
fix what
dumbest
an issue
person
in
to
Legion
fuck
was,
up.
which is trash that didn't have enough mechanics. It certainly had more than Warlords of Draenor did. But obviously, towards
Trash
the end
has
of
too
Legion,
many
people were
fucking
pulling
mechanics,
like half
man.
the dungeon and just doing laps.
It's ridiculous.
While people just AoE'd it down, which is another issue they wanted to solve going into BfA dungeon design. So that's already like 3 different things. On top of that, there's less defensives and stuff that are usable by people. And not only that, the global cooldown change comes into play. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. A lot of people's defensives are on the global cooldown, which makes responding to stuff that little bit more difficult. Not only that, they've upped the amount of things that require more than just the basics. Like a basic I would consider is a stun and kick. A lot of people can't do that. Like, let's be honest, a lot of people can't do that. But on top of that, we're now looking at soothes, we're looking at purges, we're looking at enrage, dealing with those kinds of things. Things that now need to be moved away. If we look at infested, we now need to mix in CC, short cooldown stuns, and managing that effectively, otherwise it gets completely out of control. These are all things that we have to take into account. Another thing we have to take into account here is the tank changes. Tanks were completely rehashed and redesigned in order to balance them out effectively, which took a lot of strength away from each of the tanks and rebalanced it into magical damage, which is relatively prevalent in BfA. And so
I want to just reiterate and like rephrase what he just said. So he said it took a lot of strength away from the tanks. It took strength away from the other tanks, and they put that strength in blood DKs. That's what really happened. It wasn't that the tanks lost strength, that just one tank just got all of them. That was all.
My point here is there's a load of different things happening here at once. Then saying this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem, isn't helpful, because which these things all added together? Is it a combination of them all? Is it all this kind of stuff? There's a huge amount of changes going on here, including class pruning in general. And classes working differently, all adding together. But needless to say, this is definitely causing a lot of problems. Another problem is, of course, raiders and... I heard them referred to as content pushers. I think that's a relatively fair thing to say. Because AP has been removed from Mythic Plus. Like gaining artifact power was something a lot of people, and legendaries, we can't ignore the legendaries, there were a lot of people who were very overgeared running Mythic Plus dungeons and going into pugs, and I know this because I did it, jumping into Mythic Plus pugs that are lower than what I need for my weekly chest. It's not somewhere I'm going to get an upgrade from, because that's very unlikely to happen anyway. But I can jump on my very overgeared character into a lower Mythic Plus, guarantee the success of that dungeon just by me being there, because I overgear it so much. So if I'm a damage dealer, for example, I can blow it up, or I can go in on a tank and I can tank everything and I won't die, in order to get AP and upgrade my artifact weapon, and of course have a chance at legendaries. There's no incentive there anymore. There's no incentive whatsoever for content pushers, which are just all I'm referring to there is overgeared people, to exist in that environment. There's absolutely zero reason to be there. And therefore, they're not going to go there whatsoever. So that all that support, which Blizzard does like to use, let's be honest here, Blizzard does like to use higher geared or better players, however you want to look at it, to help out in lower content, and they incentivize them to do that. We've seen that for years now. But in terms of these lower dungeons, absolutely no reason whatsoever. No reason whatsoever. And of course, that is a cyclical problem. Because the pugging world gets worse, which is hard, because it's been pretty bad for a long time, but the pugging world gets worse. So less and less re-rolled content pushers, right? The guys who are very good but on a weaker character, who you might have had in there, don't want to go in there because it's not successful. There's no chance of loot. So they'd rather wait for friends or re-roll with somebody else, and therefore there's less and less people circling around this washing machine of players that are there that maybe can swing it into your benefit. And there's also the bigger question, which I think is the main point of this video, is where exactly is the learning curve of WoW right now? Where exactly is the learning curve of WoW? It's a good question. I went back all the way to, and I really suggest you watch this video, to 2013. That's 5 years ago. 5 years ago, where I did the, during Mists of Pandaria, I did the accessibility and apathy video. It was quite big at the time, where we looked at the fact that Blizzard had created an environment where players literally didn't know if they were doing things right or wrong. Because the game
I think that's intentional.
Wasn't informing you.
That was intentional.
Because everything you did was successful.
Yeah, that was
until
intentional.
You hit a massive wall, a mountain, so to speak. And you either climbed up that mountain...
That was the graph I made.
Or you basically blamed everyone else and didn't do that content. This is also a big part of it, because the mountain right now is actually gotten a lot worse since then. And not only that, these systems that I talk about in that video have been in existence for such a long time that we've now got an entire player base in 2 generations of players who have been living this life for a long time.
Yep.
And now they're hitting a wall. I think it would be undeniable to say, and this is what I did, okay?
That's why you don't have people go into rating now.
So you guys can check this. These threads are not hard to find. Is the guys who are really struggling, certainly in the 2 to sort of 8 category, are people who belong at like +8, because that's where their gear tells them to go. But if you look at their gear, and again, yeah, this is armory stalking a little bit, but you've got to get some context for what people are saying. So there's not many other ways of doing this. They're guys who have geared outside of the Mythic Plus world, in basically the free loot world. Now, here's the issue, as I see it, and I think this is a big issue. That's the whole game. Is the free loot world is boosting people past their learning curve. Let me give you an example here. The free loot world is providing, 360 upwards. Right? It's giving 360 upwards in this world. Where does that place you in terms of, Mythic Plus? Well, it places you quite high. That's like 7, 8, 9. That's where you want to be. 7, 8, 9 and above. That's a bit of a problem, boys, because you've not done any learning before that.
Okay.
And everything you've done before that point is 100% successful. World quests, raw fronts, whatever it is, your weekly quest that you pick up down near your city to go and do some time walking dungeons or something like that. Everything you've done has been pretty much 100% successful. The game has not informed you at all that you might be the worst player ever, because you've had a 100% success rate since you installed the game, right? It's very hard to work out if you're awful. Think about that for a minute. It's really hard. It's not that easy. There are not many clues. And when people start berating you, usually gamers aren't the kindest of people. And, they'll rage at you. They'll be like, you're just fucking terrible, the worst. And the likelihood is it's so, full of expletives and rage that you're going to put it down to that guy's just an asshole and it's nothing to do with me. Why would I listen to that dickhead, right? It's very hard to work out that you're garbage until you get into the real nitty-gritty of things, because the game never informs you that you need to get
had that.
Better,
it was proving grounds, and I had to get rid of
it. You hit a wall. And typically that wall
feelings.
is involving teamwork, which isn't something you also don't need at any other point before this. It's tricky, boys. What are they going to do about it? Well, my issue is they've created a situation where they've thrown a lot of gear at people. The next point of upgrade or next point of progression is already way past any learning curve and is a steep mountain to climb. And the likelihood is they're going to make it easier and let people in. They may even move Fortified and Tyrannical back to the higher keys and just say, this is for the higher guys to deal with.
I don't think they should have Fortified and Tyrannical.
More successful runs be below 9.
I think there's a better way to do it.
Or below 10. Because that makes people feel better, makes the community happier. Rather than... Can Blizzard do anything about this? I don't know, man. I don't know. But that is my opinion on it. I'd love to see yours. And any other issues that I've not brought up in this video that are certainly contributing towards... this current environment, which is clearly a problem. I don't know whether it's a majority or anything like that, but it's a problem for a lot of people. I think that's fair to say. It's a problem for a lot of people. It's very widespread. The people are getting vicious about it. The sheer quantity of suggestions I've seen for punishments. My God. You guys should get a job somewhere. Evil. You should... Jesus Christ. They should be... if you leave a Mythic Plus dungeon, by the way, you should have your Mythic Plus cash cancelled. That's one thing I read today. Fun times. Either way, guys, I'll leave it to you.
That's actually a really good idea.
On Friday is when I am back in the office. I love you all. Bye.
That's really good idea. 100%. If you leave a Mythic Plus dungeon, whenever it's still on the timer, you should... Actually, I don't know. How would that work with groups, though? With pre-mades? What about a DC? Yeah, maybe there wouldn't be a way to make that work. I guess, I like the idea of it, right? But I don't think it would be, it wouldn't be easy to implement. But I would absolutely love that. But I don't know, man. Disband vote? Yeah, disband vote. And if people leave before the disband vote, maybe they don't get their cash for the week. But I guess, if you did that, then people would just, not get it once and then keep trolling over and over. It'd be really hard for me to say, what about pre-mades kicking you at the end of the dungeon? Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Let me guess. It happened to one guy once on the forums. Is that something that should change? The whole game should change because of that? I don't know, man. I don't think it's a big fucking deal. I don't know what that is, man. Let me read this real quick. Keys shouldn't expire. Fixed? I don't think so. I don't think that's true. People are doing the keys on my alt weekly 10, so remain to the keys. Here's the problem with Mythic Plus, is that it's boring. Like, I can do 1 or 2 Mythic Pluses a day, right? And I think doing it once with like a, doing especially for the mount dungeons. Like, I have never done a Mythic Plus for Waycrest. I have never done a Mythic Plus for, let's see, Temple of Seraphic. I don't think I've ever done a single one. I've never done a Mythic Plus for the Motherlode. I've never spent any time doing it because it's not fun. Like, what's fun about doing a dungeon over and over and over